Remember that we are just from a very bad flood that was experienced in the country. This coming immediately after a drought that lasted, the worst drought in more than 4 decades in Kenya and other parts of the region. But what is it that we need to do? Remember that the Africa Climate Summit came to Kenya. Nairobi Declaration was the document that came from that meeting. Then we went to COP28. What are some of the discussions that happened at COP28? We shall be having that discussion on how we need to transition to green energy, and I'll be having an expert with me, Brian Omenyi from SIF Kenya, as we have that discussion. But now let's go straight to the top story that we have on this segment. And the government has pledged to end food importation necessitated by the shortage of food in the country. Agriculture and Livestock Development Cabinet Secretary Mithika Linturi has assured Kenyans of enough food in the country this year because of multi-agricultural development projects funded by the World Bank at the cost of 100 billion shillings. Linturi said the 5 key World Bank funded projects being implemented in 46 counties include National Agriculture Value Chain Development Project covering 33 counties, Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Project covering 24 counties, and National Agriculture and Rural Inclusive Growth Project in 21 counties, Emergency Locust Response Program in 15 counties, and Food System Resilience Project that commenced in January 2024.
Sector with the support of the World Bank. And I think the success story that we can give this morning is that World Bank has put in $450 million that have really supported the agricultural sector in this country, in the country. The first 2 projects have been completely implemented, which is the NARIG projects and the KSAP project, meaning there has been 100% absorption from our end. So this has been possible because of the collaboration, the good relationship, and that we've had between the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development, the Council of Governors, and the World Bank. And as our good friend Vinay leaves this country to his next tour of duty, I personally want to thank him and the World Bank for the support that they have been able to give this country.
And the pastoral communities are taking the initiative of protecting their resources and participating in several carbon projects that help them generate revenue. Through carbon credits, locals across the rangelands of Marsabit, Isiolo, Samburu, and Laikipia counties are able to access quality education, health services, and achieve peace and tranquility in the area. Our reporter Husna Mohammed with a story.
Pastoral communities are among the worst hit by climate change. Despite the challenges, the communities have come together to fight drought by engaging in several carbon projects.
They decided to grow grasses, improve rangelands, so that their livestock and wildlife continue to thrive. Those actions, 10 years later, were credited in terms of carbon credits, and those carbon credits were sold in the international market to get them additional revenue.
Through the generated carbon credit revenue, the communities have changed their lives.
Majorly, when we got our carbon project, we've tried to uplift and improve the livelihood of the community in 5 major areas. One, we focused on education. We've sponsored for about 148 children in this school. For 2022, then 162 in 2023.
From 2020 till 2021, we didn't have any source of light, so the students were using their own hand torches to read. We didn't have preps at night.
By planting grass in the conservancies, the communities are able to withstand drought.
We preserve this area for dry season grazing period because we don't want to lose our livestock. You know what happens during the dry season. We lose a lot of our livestock, and this is actually affect our livelihood.
Having a grazed land for their livestock, The locals say it helps in maintaining peace among them.
Na mifugo wetu kwa sasa hawatoki kwenda conservancy zingine, kwenda kuleta vita, ama pia watoto wetu, sisi kupoteza watoto wetu. Kwa hivyo sisi kama kina mama tunaweza sema tu hii kazi tunafanya imetufaidi sisi sana, kwa sababu watoto wetu wanabaki wakiwa salama.
For long, technical aspects of climate change do not involve the communities, whom experience the wrath of the extreme droughts and floods.
What this means is as the confusion gets diminished, then communities are now able to clearly stand up for their rangelands, stand up for the environment, as well as stand up for their own development in very close partnership with the governments which give clear legislative direction.
Husna Mohammed, KTN News.
Thank you, Husna, for that story. And in studio with me is Brian Omenyi, Coordinator, Sustainable Energy Forum Access Kenya, as we talk about access to green energy and the transition that needs to happen. Welcome on the set, Brian, as we have this discussion. And from that story, we're just seeing that Kenyans are actually getting creative on matters carbon credit. What do you have to say just from that story?
Thank you so much for having me. It's interesting to really see Kenyans trying to make use of the different locally available resources to mitigate and address the issues of climate change. And the carbon credits is one of the ways that is really penetrating the country. The government has recently introduced regulations to the Climate Change Act of 2016, where carbon regulations have been introduced to sort of provide an oversight, because in the past few years we have been having carbon projects, but they were more or less by a lot of private entities that were taking advantage of communities, and there was no regulation. So nobody could be held into account of what was happening. So we feel the coming of the regulations are going to help to ensure that communities benefit from the projects that they are involved in, and that at the end of the day, we are also able to address this monster called climate change.
And even as we talk about the regulations that have been that are now in place, how then do we make sure that this information that we have, these regulations around carbon credits, gets to these communities? Because it's one thing having the regulations, having the policies, but getting to the communities to understand them so that they take advantage of that. Maybe what do we need to do? What must the government do, and all the stakeholders involved?
So we've seen, when the regulations were being introduced, they're still a draft. They have not been passed. There's been a lot of public participation, but you see the gap is the public participation is majorly attended by those who already have the information. Like for us who are in the civil society, who engage with government and other stakeholders day to day, we are able to know what is happening. But when you go to the communities, to the grassroots levels where the actual impacts happen, these communities do not know. They do not know of the existing policies. They never get to give their views and proposals to these policies that are being introduced. So the civil society and different community-based organizations have been trying to bridge this gap by holding sessions in the communities to educate them, but that's still less because an organization goes to where it has interest. So we have so many marginalized communities that do not get to benefit from this kind of information. And yet these are very great projects that can help them to, when you're planting trees, for instance, we, encouraging people, for instance, to plant trees that are, socioeconomic in nature, that, they're going to ensure they get benefits from them. So I don't know, I think there needs to be more involvement of communities in this, so that they also have their say on the different provisions. Like when you look at the percentages in terms of allocations of what the government is taking, what the proponents are taking, what the communities will take, they contribute to such kind of provisions so that they don't go at a loss or they don't get mistreated at the end of the day, yes.
Yeah, and yes, indeed, it's a conversation that continues out there.
Yes.
And even you've mentioned something to do with how then, because when we talk about carbon credits, it's as having a carbon table that we can be able to clean the atmosphere pretty much,
yes.
Which then brings the conversation of emissions out there, how to transition from fossil fuels to green energy. Let's talk about this conversation from our context as Kenyans. Where are we today?
So Kenya is one of the countries that is setting a good example when it comes to electricity generation, for instance. Our grid is relatively green with about 91% of our energy mix, electricity generation coming from renewable energy resources. So you see we are endowed with resources such as geothermal, which is not in every country in Africa, and we're actually the leading. And it contributes to about 41% to our energy mix. Look at hydro, which contributes about 30%, and solar, wind. And so this gives Kenya a very good advantage when it comes to electricity generation. The biggest gap has been when it comes to clean cooking. We still have a large population in our country heavily depending on biomass for cooking purposes. And this has not only detrimental effects to the environment, but to the health of these communities. Statistics indicate we lose about 21,000 people in Kenya annually due to indoor air pollution. And this is largely because of cooking. There are so many factors that come into play with why do Kenyans go for this kind of alternative options. One is affordability. When you look at some of the equipment, some of the improved cook stoves that are being sold out here, they're quite expensive. For somebody who's barely earning much, they cannot afford to buy them. Fuel wood is readily available. You just go to the forest and access it readily. You don't have to pay anyone. Then there's also the aspect of cultural beliefs. There's somebody who says cooking ugali in 3 stone is the taste is different with cooking it on gas. So there are those socio-cultural dynamics that come into play. But then for me, that is not the major one. The issue of reliability, affordability, the leading ones that make us rely heavily on biomass. So when we stop looking at our energy access from the electricity generation and look at all these other sectors like clean cooking, and the aspect of even that electricity, affordability is an issue. Right now, if you buy tokens worth 1,000, almost 600 of that money is going to taxes and everything. So imagine only getting 400 shillings worth of tokens. That's not affordable. So if we say we have electricity generation from green, we have about 75% of the country with access to electricity. At the end of the day, it doesn't translate to the actual use and consumption of that electricity.
And you've mentioned the entire conversation on green cooking, and here is where we seem not to be making any tangible steps towards green cooking. And as the government, as civil society like yourselves, as the media, we continue to highlight these issues, how do we then come up with a formidable solution to the person at the grassroots, so that first of all they understand why you want them to get out of fuel wood and transition to green energy, and from the government side, what must they do to make sure that even as the transition happens, it is affordable?
Thank you. So we've seen some steps, starting from the government level. There are policies that are being put in place. So we have the clean cooking strategy that is being developed, but you see that is still at the high level. We're just having government and stakeholders who have been leading this whole discussion. It has not yet penetrated to the communities where the actual implementation is supposed to take place. Then there's also another electric cooking strategy that is being developed. All these are supposed to be ready because, as the president pronounced himself, will seek to transition by 2028 to clean energy. So then what needs to be done is, how do we, for instance, some of the heaviest consumers of biomass are schools and institutions that are under the government's watch, for instance, factories, prisons, industries and institutions that the government can seek to introduce alternatives. So when you go to a community, for instance, how do you introduce an alternative like biogas? Cattle rearing community, how do they take advantage of the waste from the animals and turn it into something resourceful and useful that they can use as an energy resource. So that is something that many communities have not been introduced to. There is a lot of fear. For instance, there are communities that don't believe they can use human waste to convert it to energy, but it's doable. How do you introduce things like production of briquettes from readily available raw materials within the communities, like biodegradable materials? This is things that communities are already doing, those that have already been enlightened and have the knowledge and the skills, and it's not expensive to do that. It's basically organizing forums to train communities, because there are so many young people, women, and even men who are out there jobless, and this can be a source of income for them, and at the same time addressing the issues of clean cooking. How do we make use of improved cook stoves? We've worked with communities where women are producing these cook stoves from readily available materials. They're using less biomass, they're making use of alternatives like the briquettes that I've mentioned. So there's that gap of then moving from the higher level discussions to the grassroots, where the implementation is supposed to be taking place, and allowing the communities to make use of their locally available materials and resources, then make use of them to generate clean and sustainable energy. So we need to first sensitize the communities. They understand why we are against the alternatives they're using. Once they understand that, we are able to provide with them alternatives, not just educating them and then rushing back to Nairobi and in conferences. So we need to educate them on the alternatives available, basing on the context they are in. We need to then help them to have the behavior change. So how do they transition now from these sources that they are used to and they think and feel are their day-to-day ways of operating, and transitioning to cleaner, more sustainable energy sources that still meets, at the end of the day, their needs. So that has to be really, and of course there is the issue of affordability. How do we ensure that even if somebody is transitioning, we don't add another burden of cost that might not be favorable for them to uptake these things. So we need to address all those dynamics so that we ensure that we have, for me, it's more of the inclusiveness levels have not been great. So that's been a big hindrance to the success of adoption of clean cooking technologies in the grassroots.
And so when you mentioned something to do with biogas, and biogas you find are readily available materials that we use on a daily basis. Say, if we talk about, say, Nairobi County wanting to produce biogas, it's as easy as having a contract with, say, Marikiti and all these markets, and transforming all that waste that goes into the landfills into an energy source that is helping communities out there, even if it's just for a school. But you find these are conversations that have been left, like you say, to the creme de la creme, to the high-level conversations. So now how do we scale down that conversation? We break it down so that counties are doing their bit, they're pulling their own weight. We go down to the ward level and even to the villages, like the small communities, and people get to be highlighted. So what strategies, per se, should all of us engage in to make sure that this information gets down there and we remove it from the top level leadership or policy makers and bring it down there?
So there's the aspect of political goodwill that we need to have to create the conducive environment for us to be able to make use of these resources. Like as you said, you gave a good example of Nairobi County. Not that the government, I don't know if it's ignorance, if it's them just assuming, because these are problems. Like these are problems we see on a day-to-day basis, and they can make use of these resources. So there is the aspect of policy, where we've been to different counties, and one of the gaps we find is energy department is not prioritized. It's lumped up in different other many sectors that at the end of the day, even in terms of allocation and of resources and technical capacity, is missing. And so many counties don't think that we should prioritize energy. They think energy is about electricity. So if electricity is there, then the rest is a non-issue. So when we need that political goodwill that will ensure that there is allocation of resources when it comes to the budgets. There's allocation of technical capacity within the counties to spearhead these programs. The second bit is for civil society organizations, community-based organizations, and social enterprises and different other groups to come together, identify opportunities within these communities, be able to engage the communities, be able to train on skills, be able to look at what are the locally available solutions that they can be able to take to the communities. The third aspect now borrows from the second one on awareness creation. We need to seriously have these conversations with the grassroots communities. We need to sensitize them and educate them on the importance of adopting cleaner, sustainable methods that are, are able to still meet the needs of their day-to-day. On the issue of affordability, there have been some organizations like MCOPA or PAYGO systems where communities are able to purchase some of these improved and clean cooking technologies, and they have a payment model where you can pay in installments so that you don't have to pay all the amount upfront. And so it's a more or less sustainable way and a convenient method that communities can take up. But we've seen different other technologies that are coming up. So it's also trying to understand what these technologies are and how relevant they are in addressing the needs of the communities. Yes.
And let's just talk a little bit, briefly on the conversation at COP28 on energy transition. I mean, you were there, you were in Dubai, and how was that conversation? And why do we seem to be having a problem on transitioning fully to clean and renewable energy? Where's the disconnect, especially from the global north?
Yeah, the global north countries have been having a big challenge to transition to cleaner, renewable energy sources. And this is because their economies are, the foundation of their economies is on fossil fuels. So if you are asking those countries to transition, then their economies may crumble down in minutes. We were in Dubai, and a country like Dubai is almost entirely run by fossil fuels. So, they have, of course, they've developed the economies. They're doing much better than a country like Kenya. But then, that's why, then these countries who constitute, when it comes to decision making, they have the powers and the privileges of, controlling the masses. And one of the gaps is, you see, as developing countries, we also heavily depend on the global north for support in terms of development and everything. So at the end of the day, they dictate a lot of our decisions, a lot of our agreements. So African countries will go with a position, and then the moment the negotiations begin, they are compromised in one way or the other, and then that doesn't see the light of the day. But then at COP28, you'll be shocked that this is the first time the word fossil fuels was included in a final COP decisions. For the past, this is the 28th conference. So you can imagine how that process has been. In 2020, COP26 in Glasgow, there was the whole push to have the phase out of fossil fuels, but they only included phase down of coal. Last year, we expected the fossil fuels to be really a clear stance to be made to do away with fossil fuels, but nothing was done. For the last year's COP, it was only the word fossil fuels which was included in the final decision, which states that we are transitioning away. When you're saying transitioning away, you don't want to put definite timelines, which then helps us to measure by when, what is somebody's country supposed to do, the responsibility and all that. So the call to have the phase out of fossil fuels, which sounds more strong, and bring a sense of urgency for developed countries to really do away with fossil fuels, and then transition to the renewable energy, was not captured. So we hope that can be captured in the coming discussions. Another interesting outcome that we can say was captured was the agreement to triple renewable energy resources investments and also double energy efficiency efforts by 2030. So that we feel is an advantage to African countries because we are richly endowed with renewable energy resources. When you go through the Nairobi Declaration, it states that Africa is home to about 40% of the world's renewable energy resources. So all we need to do is to put the right investments into the renewables that we have. So with the commitment at COP to transition, to triple the investments in renewable energy, we then, as Africa, should position ourselves at a vantage point to attract the investments so that we are able to make use of these renewable energy resources for the benefits of our communities, because we don't have a problem. Okay, we have the fossil fuels, but then that's not a pathway we want to take because it's taking us down the road.
You see, Brad, you've mentioned that Africa is home to renewable energy that we should tap into, but also Africa still has fossil fuels that we've not drilled. So let's have that discussion after this break when we come back right here on Planet Action.